Okay, well, thank you all very much. This is the saloon. So if you're looking for the club, it's actually the other room over there. I'm Will Hayes. I'm the CEO of Lucidworks. Lucidworks were the commercial entity behind Leucine and Solr, also the creators of a Lucidworks Fusion platform, which we'll talk about quite a bit. I've been with Lucidworks for about 3.5 years now, and prior to that, I was part of the founding team at a company called Splunk, which you might be familiar with as well. So kind of seen a whole spectrum of kind of commercial and open source technology. And what we thought would be interesting to do here today is sort of give you some background on the evolution of the company, some of the things that we've learned over time in terms of building a community, building a company around the community, and some kind of best practices or lessons learned around commercialization. So as I said, Lucidworks is the company behind Lucene and Solr. And so what that means is that we drive a lot of the development. So about 70 to 80% of what goes into the code base is coming from our employees. We employ about 40% of the active committers that are in the community around the technology. And we tend to act as a sort of a focal point for the community as a whole with other people who are contributing, other companies that are sort of collaborating, kind of helping sort of drive a lot of those activities. We end up doing things like sponsoring the Solar Revolution, for example, a lot of the marketing that goes on, the webinars, web development, and other sort of things that we can contribute back in and around the technology. Solr, if you're not familiar, is used by about 90% of the Fortune 500. So it's one of the most widely deployed open source search engines that's out there today. Primarily a document store. There's other technologies that are out there, things MongoDB, Elasticsearch, also sort of built or derivatives from Leucine. We look at a lot of more kind of primary search use cases. So things like your e-commerce shopping sites, content management. Anytime we're serving up sort of documents, highly unstructured data, typically where Solr plays within the enterprise. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is that you probably use Solr every day, whether you know it or not. If you're using something like the iCloud, you're working with companies like Bloomberg, like AOL, eBay, Amazon, and so on. There's also a massive ecosystem in and around Solr. So we're the primary search interface into the Hadoop platforms that are out there today, the commercial platforms. So Cloudera, Hortonworks, and MapR. And as a company, we work very closely with these organizations to help kind of coordinate the efforts, coordinate a lot of the features and functionality that go into the technology that can power a lot of these sort of next generation use cases. So what I want to talk about today is really, how do you kind of strike that balance between community and commercialization? Because both are incredibly important. And I think as most people know that have been around the industry for a long time, that these open source projects, especially the more popular ones, typically don't get there independent of a company or an organization that's supporting it. So in most cases, if you go back to things like Linux and Red Hat, right, and then a lot of the Hadoop evolution that you've seen today, the platforms that are being widely deployed today, they're typically backed by an organization whose primary focus is in driving the development, driving the direction, providing the marketing support, providing that kind of push, if you will, to really move the technology forward. But that being said, there's a lot of advantages that you get from this community development, both as an end user or an implementer of the technology, or as a commercial organization like ourselves. It's really the diversity that comes in, the different types of viewpoints, the use cases, the test cases, the cultures in which we get deployed. And so being a search engine, obviously we work across multiple languages, multiple types of inputs, and those types of things. And so we benefit greatly as a technology platform from all of this collaboration that goes into it. There's different models, as we know, so just because something is open source doesn't necessarily mean that it sort of follows either the Apache standard, whether it comes from governance, or even a licensing model where you can sort of package and redeploy. So we'll look at some of the pros and cons of different approaches. In general, as I'm sure most people at this conference know, open source, it means that there's a level of transparency. You typically have access to the code. You can modify the code depending on licensing, and we won't get into that in too much detail here. You can package, you can modify, you can ship, you can really leverage it as part of your technology stack. The Apache Foundation brings another element to this, and that's governance. And governance has its pros and cons. In some ways, it can create some inefficiencies in order to sort of drive things like roadmaps and features forward. But it really means that there's a stabilization around the code base. And if you think about Solr and the ecosystem that's around it, a lot of that adoption comes from that confidence that these organizations have that the code base will remain steady, that things like backwards compatibility are thought about in a very kind of thoughtful and slow manner, and that the roadmap is moving consistently with the foundation of the project. So that can kind of give a peace of mind. And as an organization, it's something that we cherish in terms of what it really means around the way that we control changes within our technology, the inputs and the collaborations that go into that. Now, there can be some disadvantages to this model as well. Like I said, if you're familiar with Splunk, it's sort of the other side of the spectrum, kind of where I started out in data platforms, and that was highly commercialized, very expensive, very proprietary. And so there's some advantages to that in terms of the way that we controlled the code base, the decisions that we could make, the pace in which we could drive changes. We could decide, release to release if we wanted to dramatically shift things like architecture and those kinds of things. But the cons that can kind of come with this other model tend to be around velocity, right? And so with collaboration comes sometimes a lot of difference in opinions, and within the Apache Foundation in particular, you have the right to sort of prevent certain things from going forward without having sort of a further discussion. And again, the advantage of this is that we get a lot of diversity within those inputs, and we get a lot of confidence in the way that changes are being governed and the way that the direction of the technology is going. So there's not a lot of surprises, which is something important, especially with search, right, where you're building this foundational technology, which typically isn't being delivered as just a vanilla service, but we're building on top of this things that are powering our business, things like customer service, e-commerce, all the way into some of the more kind of surveillance and 360 types of applications where search is a paradigm really which provides unstructured natural access back into your technology. So within the Apache Foundation, one of the things that again, we really benefit from is sort of keeping things what we call like on the rails. Right? There's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of collaboration. We're not able to, even as an organization who sponsors and puts a lot of sort of monetary support behind the project, Lucidworks doesn't have the power just to come in and say, you know what, we're just going to kind of take this thing in another direction. We're going to sort of rip it out from underneath people. And so with that collaboration and that confidence comes in. And we're very fortunate as an organization because a lot of larger organizations then collaborate with us. And so we get to work with companies like Cloudera, we get to work with companies like IBM, and even in the commercial space, sort of the non-technology sector, if you will, I look at companies like Bloomberg who actually contribute a tremendous amount of knowledge and information back into the project. And so as a company who's sort of the sponsor of this, we benefit pretty heavily from that. Other companies that apply this model, companies like DataStax with the Cassandra project, companies like Hortonworks with their distribution of Hadoop, and we'll look at some of the models that you can take to market across these different organizations. And like I said, a lot of what we want to reflect on here are the things that we've learned from both the pros and the cons, and why we've sort of evolved our business over the years to adapt to some of these challenges. Now, you take the non-Apache model, where open source becomes more of a distribution mechanism, and this is something that's similar to free software, right? And you kind of have the whole, it can be free as in beer, not as in speech. In other cases, they still have Apache licensing where they allow you to take and redistribute, package, and modify code as you see fit. What you don't necessarily get with these is that governance. And so in some cases, organizations are able to push changes faster. They're able to make bolder decisions in terms of the direction that they want to go, but you don't really have that confidence or that peace of mind within the project if you're adopting this for a broader purpose. And so companies like Elastic, who have built a great business in and around open source technology, MongoDB, tend to use open source as more of a delivery mechanism. Again, similar to sort of a freemium model, not quite the same broader benefits that we see in some of the more kind of community-driven development. So, why even build a community around a technology? Why does it matter, especially when you're trying to build a business and trying to take something to market? Well, again, without having that body, you have no governance. And there can be advantages, and as you're an organization who's trying to drive something, especially in the early days, in the 1.0 and the 2.0, where bolder decisions are important, it's helpful, right? Because you're not necessarily having to do the whole bike shedding around every change. You don't have to kind of come in and debate. But without that, what you don't get is this sort of diverse set of inputs. You don't ensure that a broader set of environments, a broader set of culturals, like when you come to things like languages, are effectively getting to utilize this technology. And so as you build this community, it can kind of keep you sort of true to the ultimate goal, which is building great software. And I think something we pride ourselves in Lucidworks every day. We want to go build a great business. But more importantly, as you talk to engineers, there's some folks who are here today even, and you'll see them giving a variety of talks, they really believe in what they're doing. And they believe in the adoption that they've seen of this technology and the evolution. And that's something that you can take a lot of pride in. And whether you're working for the company or you're outside of the company, you're sort of a part of a bigger movement, if you will, around this technology. And like I said, nothing makes us prouder than the fact that hundreds of millions of people every day, billions of transactions go through our system. And this is coming from contributions that we make as an organization, but more importantly, the contributions that come in from the broader community. You get a lot of folks who dedicate a lot of time and effort, which is really special. And so people who want to see things move forward, they want to see changes, they have ideas that they want to share and collaborate on, and so they get to be a part of this broader movement. And as a company, it's a very fortunate thing when we can come to events like this, when we can meet people from all over the world who have interest in our technology, not just in utilizing it, but in actually advancing it forward. And that body of knowledge, or that body of experience that we get to bring in is really special, and it really has an impact on our technology. So with all of that greatness in open source and in communities and places like the Apache Foundation, why build a company, right? Why can't we just let these things sort of go? And as I talked about earlier, there's a lot of velocity that can come from a company, and you see the more successful projects, they've always have an entity or a sponsor behind them, somebody who's employing people to contribute on a daily basis. Because in most cases, people who are contributing within open source who are not working for a sponsor company, they're either doing this in their spare time, or they're doing this sort of in allotted time that they're given by their employer when they've got a day job, right? What also ends up happening is that companies start to put these things into more mission-critical types of deployments, right? So the first thing that always sort of comes to mind is support. In a commercial software organization, we kind of have this saying, it's all about the throat to choke, right? If somebody's going to make a big bet on technology, especially in infrastructure technology, where it's not just something that you're delivering to an end user, but you're building your business, you're building a variety of products and services on top of this, you want to ensure that when something goes wrong, you have somebody to call. Right? And you want to ensure that the people that you have to call can actually get you up and running quickly, can respond, can meet service level expectations, just like you would within commercial software. So support is something that kind of comes naturally to a company. And at Lucidworks, this was sort of the evolution of the business that came from the founders and committers of the project that said, hey, we're helping a lot of people out here through the forums, through things like Stack Exchange. What if we build a business here where we can start to deliver SLAs and that to organizations that want to go farther with Solr? Consulting is another big thing, obviously. There's no better way to get help, whether it's direction, architectural guidance, or even how to drive modifications within the code when you can work with the core group of people themselves. And so this is a very natural posture that a lot of open source companies take, and it's one that can actually have some drawbacks, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. The things that we really realize are it goes beyond the core project. Right? When you get into the enterprise in particular, take something like a vertical like retail, life science for research, insurance where they're doing compliance and monitoring, where they need more. And it's not that they can't develop more on their own, but there's really no point in them trying to invest in the resources and the development and the ongoing maintenance to integrate with things like proprietary technology, security frameworks like Active Directory, for instance, more advanced features and capabilities that go beyond the core of that open source project. And that's where we see a great opportunity in building a company around open source where you can start to look into the broader ecosystem and say, there are areas where we can start to make things easier for folks. Because at the end of the day, one of my favorite sayings when I talk to customers is, free ain't free, right? As developers and folks who have worked within open source technologies, just because you're not paying for a license for something doesn't mean that it just comes to you and suddenly you're just instantly successful with it, right? You often need to invest resources, you need to hire the right people, you need to ensure that you actually have access to those people, and so sometimes talent can become a bottleneck when it comes to adoption. And this is another opportunity as you have a project that you're involved in, whether there's a sponsor or not, to say, hey, we can go stand up an organization that can provide this final mile for these folks. So when you look at the different models, what ends up happening, and it really depends on the type of organization you build. So, I'm from San Francisco, sort of the what we call the Silly Valley, if you will, especially now because we have so many dating and food apps and things that are just kind of ridiculous. But as the pressure comes in when you start raising venture capital money, it's not just to say, hey, we're generating revenue on a regular basis, it's growing that revenue. Right? And the difficulty comes when you get into a business where you're simply coming in and offering consulting services where organizations will come to you and say, hey, I need your help with A, B, or C, and you go in and you solve their problem, and then they're on their way, and you never hear from them again. That's a very difficult way to sort of build a reoccurring revenue base. And that's something that's incredibly important for the lifespan of the company. And you see a lot of organizations, especially open source companies, that run into this challenge where they get a lot of popularity within the project, especially early on, a lot of adoption. People are coming to them for consulting and that type of help. And then they determine, you know what? I think we're good. Project has been stabilized. We've been up and running. We've been able to go out and hire people. And so as a business, it's really hard to continuously sort of grow that revenue stream. And so you want to find ways where you can actually create ongoing value for your customer, where you can help them do things better, faster, stronger, where they're relying on that open source core, but you're driving additional value. Support is another thing where it goes a little bit beyond consulting because you can have relationships when you're offering support that are ongoing. But again, over time, organizations start to build up that expertise. Support is a lot like insurance, right? It's saying, you know what? I kind of know what I'm doing here, but in the event that something goes incredibly wrong, I want to have somebody who I can call who I know is going to be on the hook to make me successful. And you can imagine in your own daily life if something like car insurance was an option for you, right? You could have it, but you weren't forced to have it. You could say, you know what, when times are good, and yep, I like having that peace of mind, but as the economic headwinds start to hit, I think I'm going to take a little more risk. And so organizations tend to sort of think that same way. And so this is where kind of moving that model from being a consulting services organization, even being a pure support organization on open source, into that integration, into sort of building that higher level value becomes incredibly important. So in these different models that companies tend to take on, you see companies like Databricks today who are sort of starting out with services and training. And again, this is a great opportunity to kind of get engaged with your install base, to start provide value, to create awareness of what you can do and where you can come in and help them, get enterprises deployed quickly. You can harden their deployments, give them advice on things like architecture and so forth. But over time, there's very little commitment from that customer back into the organization. So again, it's difficult to sort of build a continuous revenue stream and to continue to build your organization. Another challenge is as you want to grow, right? So who can you afford to hire when you can't predict what type of revenue is going to be coming into the business, right? We all want to hire more engineers. We want to hire more field consultants, people who can go out there. At Lucidworks, we see it being such a scarce resource of people who have deep knowledge of our technology that we want to go out and find as many folks as possible to come be a part of our organization. But in order for me to do that as the CEO of the company, I have to be able to project what our growth is going to be. How much cash are we going to put into the business year over year? And so simply relying on a training model doesn't really get you there. And you need to find something that's a little more consistent as you're sort of building that revenue stream. Talked about this a bit already, but that enterprise support model, this is one of the more natural evolutions that an open source company goes towards, where you can start to provide those SLAs and these types of things. But the drawback is where you get into this idea of sort of optional insurance. And over time, as companies build up their expertise, we see a diminished value. And what history has kind of told us is that people who sort of start to build out an organization around this model when the project is in its infancy stages, where it has a lot of issues, where there's a lot of stability, where they need constant touches with the organization, it tends to be an exciting time because you can go out and you can start to acquire a lot of customers, especially in a popular project. But as organizations become more dependent on you, or sorry, more dependent on your technology, what they're going to do is they're going to invest in their own resources. They're going to start to hire. They're going to start to bring people on board who can start to, handle these things internally. We go into organizations today, some of the financial services, where their Solr team is 10x the size of ours. And their organizations are, tens of billions of dollars, right? So when we come in and say, hey, yeah, we're going to be the folks that you guys can call when something goes down, that doesn't typically fly so well. So you want to find a way to kind of evolve beyond this. DataStax did something interesting, and it kind of has its pros and its cons, but they moved into what's sort of a certified distribution model. And so what this said is that we are going to give you a version of Cassandra that's been hardened, that's been tested, that goes through more rigorous testing and trials than what you get from the Apache version. And they've pegged their open source support to that version. And so there you're at least creating some dependency within your customer base where if they want to have this level of service and this level of assurances, they're working along your certified distribution. What happens here, and what typically is the drawback, is that you start to deviate from what that sort of primary branch or core bit of code is. And so a lot of the advantages that people see in open source is, again, diversity of input, the changes that they can take advantage of, the transparency starts to diminish. So where it sort of creates a tighter relationship with the end user, it can tend to sort of dilute the value of what open source technology really brings into an organization. So it's something that you want to think carefully about. It's something that you want to spend a lot of time with your community and with your customer base and understand where are the areas that people are challenged that we can come in and help, and where are the things that we want to stay away from so we don't look like we've just simply forked the code and we're maintaining something else over here and you're not really getting the value of open source. And then finally, this is where at Lucidworks we sort of have gotten to recently, is extending with proprietary features and add-ons. And as you do this, what you want to be cognizant of is sort of what are the use cases that we can really go build a business around? Because when you're dealing in something like search or a data platform, as technologists and engineers, we tend to say, hey, this thing can do everything. We can replace your Oracle database, we can run your shopping website, we can run your content site, you name it. But as we're building a business around this, we want to focus in on what are those primary use cases that we think that we can go out and monetize, where we can add a lot of value, where we can build things that help customers be a better version of themselves. Right? So in search, an example would be something like retail, where we've extended Solr to bring in all of the data acquisition that can go out and pull things from databases and provide data enrichment services at ingestion time, and then the relevancy tuning and the recommendations and machine learning that can help drive better conversion on websites. And as we do this, what happens is we avoid creating conflict within the community, because we're looking at very specific features and capabilities that can extend Solr in a way that may not be for everybody. Because what you don't want to do as the commercial sponsors, you don't want to piss off your community, to be frank. Excuse my language. But it's really about what are the things that we can contribute. And at Lucidworks, we have a dedicated team within the open source who their job is to continuously bring code back in. And we try to look at the broadest set of features that we can contribute back into Solr, and the things that we commercialize, the things that we make proprietary on top of it are very specific. We tend to look at this sort of sponsor versus guardian. We are not the guardian of the community. The community is the guardian of itself. Our job is to be a cheerleader. Our job is to support, to provide resources where we can, where it actually makes sense to help sort of encourage and grow the open source community and build our business along specific verticals where we can create additional value for customers that are really looking for solutions. So when you think about the community, what are the things that the community really cares about? Well, they don't want to see you hold this back. And I think some companies actually do a pretty poor job at making this separation. Things like security. Security is important, especially in a data platform. There's no reason for the organization to go and develop proprietary features around security when it's something that can be absorbed by the broader community. And so it's important to bring those types of features back. Ease of use, scalability, stability. When you get into that certified model, you want to stay away from this notion of, well, this is the more stable version of the open source code. If you have that capability to go out and develop that, you should be bringing that back into the community. The things the community doesn't care about necessarily, again, these industry-specific use cases, integrations with proprietary technologies, right? our SharePoint connector. Not the most exciting thing, but this isn't something that the Solr community is incredibly excited for us to go and contribute back. So we can take that out. We can commercialize that for organizations that are using SharePoint, typically organizations used to working with proprietary software who are okay purchasing license. You can also look at this in terms of other sort of pain points for the community where they may not want your additional extensions, right? Where we're increasing the technical debt within the project. So things like testing overhead, and that becomes more complicated, longer tail, where you're increasing the size of the package. That, oh, hey, we developed all of these things for some very specific use cases, and now the package size is doubled. It's not really something that the community gets too thrilled about. So what you want to look at is, again, can I develop things that aren't useful to a broader set of the population, but for really a subset of that population. I'm going to kind of hurry up here just because we're running out a little bit of time, but I wanted to make this a bit of a case study. So at Lucidworks, we had been in business for about 5 years. We were working along Apache Solr, like I said, providing support, providing consulting services. And one of the things that we noticed in our install base was that more and more people were building expertise operationally, didn't necessarily need support to keep the thing up and running. In fact, Solr was quite stable. But they were building these applications with varying degrees of success that we felt like we could come in and help them do better. So the first thing is we took a look at different industries. We looked at patterns within our support cases. We looked at patterns within the services business that we were building. And we looked for areas where we thought, you know what, people would be more than happy to make a buy versus build decision if we could extend Solr in these particular ways. So when you're looking into the verticals that you want to extend into, make sure that there's use cases that exist that you can go out and monetize. You want to find industries that are open to open source adoption. Now, this is something that's actually evolved over the years. Back in the day, 10 years ago, you'd very rarely see government or financial service or healthcare actually utilize open source technology. Now it's considered imperative for organizations that want to stay agile, that want to stay competitive, that they have to look to what's going out there in the community and not become locked in by vendors. So that problem is no longer really as much of a concern. And then, like I said, you have organizations that are active within communities, and these are areas that you can target. And then from there, you want to go to the use cases. You want to say, what are the most high-value areas? And you want to pick just a handful, right? You can't just go out and say you're going to go out and boil the ocean and do things for everybody, because I can tell you just from experience, it's very hard to go out and build a business that way. But when you can find a very narrow set of cases where you say, we can build proprietary features here that specifically increase the capability for these verticals, for these industries, for these use cases, you can start to build a successful commercial business on top of your open source. So with Lucidworks, like I said, we looked back over all of our consulting engagements, training engagements, the support cases that we had, and we determined what our top 6 use cases were in which people wanted to do more with search. And they were usually limited by time and resources, or simply just acquiring enough talent to go out and build things like recommendation engines, like data acquisition frameworks. And so we developed a platform that we call Fusion, which takes Solr, and then we've introduced Spark recently, and can talk more about that if you want to come by our booth, and then built the proprietary features around that could drive our core use cases. So things like our data acquisition framework, our machine learning and signal processing facilities, which allow us to do advanced analytics to determine better user experiences and relevancy, better UIs for doing tuning. And again, these are things that add value in particular cases, but not necessarily things where the community goes, hey, why don't you contribute that back in? We try to be very careful about the things that we want to bring back into Solr that we know have that broader case. This also allows us to take advantage of a model that we call open core, which means at its core, you're dealing with unadulterated Solr. So all of the APIs are available. You can deploy the Fusion bits against existing applications. And so it prevents some of that vendor lock-in as well. So what you get is you get that advantage of open source technology, but we can build a licensed business that's much easier to scale from a revenue perspective. And so you reduce the friction of adoption of places that are saying, you know what, we don't want to get burned, especially in search. There's been so much consolidation, right? Endeca got bought by Oracle. Fast gets bought by Microsoft. Autonomy turned into a freaking disaster. So people are very kind of apprehensive about this adoption. And so as we can deliver this open core model, it gives people a peace of mind. Finally, again, I can't stress enough, and I think most people understand this, but we like to sometimes romanticize about open source and just the community-driven development. Good projects need good companies. They need companies who are acting as a sponsorship, who are not trying to just be the guardian and the controller of something, but really the cheerleader, the supporter, bringing in things that the community can't necessarily do themselves. You know, we promote every solar release through webinars. We go out to thousands of people who come in, can learn about this. We have our folks lead those efforts, providing cooler t-shirts and stickers and websites and all the things that we can do to really prop up the community effort and prop up the project without getting in the way or sort of seeing as a burden or a drag to it. We try to champion the committers wherever we can. Again, we're always out there trying to hire different folks from within the community. There's a whole other talk we could give about the balance of not wanting to hire everybody within your community, because then you don't really have the diversity and those types of things that are important. But we want to ensure that wherever we can, as we have get-togethers, as we sponsor conferences, that we're bringing these folks together, that we're showing them appreciation, that we're trying to provide the support that an organization can provide that can't necessarily happen organically out there. And then finally, you know, what are some of the lessons that we learned? Support is a hard business. It's a great way to get started. It's a great way to bootstrap, but it's a very hard business to scale. And as people are coming to you and they're coming for these low-end packages in particular where they're saying, hey, you know, I want to pay you $15,000, $20,000 a year, what ends up happening more often than not is that they have a specific set of problems that they want you to come in and help resolve, and then they sort of go away. And again, if you're going to build a healthy organization, if you're going to go out and hire great engineers and great people, you need to have the ability to predict your business, to grow your business. And so our lesson was that, you know what, we really need to kind of stay away from just a pure play, low-end support business. We find other ways to help them through community forums and those types of things, but they're really not the kind of customer base that we have. Again, going beyond just sort of that break-fix support, if something's important to your customer, they will build expertise around it. There's no doubt about that. Whether it takes them a year or 5 years, they will get there eventually. And so you want to kind of increase the value of what you bring as an organization. Our people have always been our most valuable asset, will continue to be our most valuable asset. One of the things that we pride ourselves on, again, is that the folks who are here at Lucidworks, what they're doing with this technology, whether they were working for us or not, these are the things that they care about. And care is an incredibly important part of our business, and we look for people who have just a care about the technology, a care about the customers, a care about the problems that we're solving, and we try to value that as much as possible. This is not, the 90s where you would go out and build these software companies up in the boardroom and all the business folks were there cheersing and cigars and whatever. This is the world of developer-led business. And as we go in and as we start to work with our customers, we're not talking to executives. We're talking to developers. We're trying to solve their problems. We're trying to bring value into what they're doing day to day, and that's something that we pride ourselves on. And the final thing, and as Lucidworks, again, 8 years in the business, what we learn is be open to evolution, right? What works today may not work tomorrow. I think one of the worst things you can do as you're trying to grow an organization or grow a business is sort of commit to something full-heartedly, where you say, you know what, this is what we said, this is what we're going to continue to do, and we're not going to waver, right? You want to be open to that evolution. You want to listen to your customers. You want to watch the business. You want to see what's working and what's not, and really optimize for that. So I think I'm a few minutes over, so everybody can get to lunch. Happy to answer any questions here or afterwards, but thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. This has been a great Buzzwords.
Thank you, Will. Yes, we have time for questions. We have exactly 7 minutes for questions.
Oh,
so
gotta slow down.
Yeah. So who has a question in the audience?
Hi. So, quick question: what does your revenue mix look like today? Like, how much is platform? How much is still support?
That's a good question. So, we sort of made this shift about 3 years ago, and in fact, to blow it out even further. Initially, what the business was looking like was about 70% consulting services and 30% enterprise support. In about 2013, we made a real focus within the organization to say we've got to get away from what we call one-time revenue. Because, again, it's very hard to predict, it's very hard to grow the business, and frankly, as you're out raising money and doing all the kind of the less glamorous things that you need to do in terms of running an organization, it's difficult to gain that traction. When we launched Fusion, which was in 2014, so by then we had shifted the business to about 60% subscription, which was a very good shift for us within 1 year. Fusion launched in 2014. We finished 2015 within that subscription revenue, which was then about 80% of the revenue mix. We were doing about 75% of that through the commercial platform. So this was a goal that we set out to do and we were actually quite successful with and we were very proud of. The outlier there, and the one thing I didn't talk about too much in the support business, is that you will get to cases where support can be interesting for you. And we tend to look at some of the most complex and some of the largest deployments. So Salesforce.com has replatformed everything search on top of Solr. And in those types of infrastructure decisions, you're not going to go with something proprietary, and we understand that. But we're more than happy, and in fact, we're quite excited to work with them and to support them. The Apple iCloud would be another example of that. And what we look at is, if you think about the architecture and the open core model, our investment in Solr, which is great because it's something we believe in, it's also core to what we're trying to build on top. So as we can get into environments like Salesforce and start working at those volumes and those sizes of distributions and the complexity that they bring to it, it's actually great experience for us. We bring that obviously back into the open source code base and we consume all that value up the stack. So sometimes that mix, though, the transaction mix is much heavier on the platform side. We've done some significant deals in the open source for support for these very large, complicated organizations.
Another question?
Thanks. You mentioned industry-specific features like a SharePoint connector, which you develop for customers. Do you got a path for your industry or commercial products, how you will push them into the community in the future if you see a broad need for that?
Again, if we see a broad need, we're more than happy to do it. We have a saying, Solr wins, we win, right? But what we found is as you get to these more specific, especially proprietary integrations, the community really is not interested in that. And so I think we've done a really good job in sort of drawing that line between what do we do for the community as a whole and what do we do for the business. And to date, we haven't seen a lot of pressure either way. What'll get interesting is we do a lot of sort of machine learning and analytics and things that we're bringing back in to provide better search experiences. I think the industry is sort of evolving towards that, utilizing not just search as an index and a retrieval engine, but really the smarts that come with the search engine. And so I think we'll have a moment where we'll have to kind of look at, okay, is some of what we're doing around the machine learning aspect and the prediction aspect of retrieval something that can make sense back within the community. But then you get into, again, the technical debt and the footprint and that you bring back into the project. So it's quite possible that we open source a component that works with Solr that's not necessarily part of the Solr distribution. We had a question right here, yeah.
You mentioned the challenges of interacting with the community and gave advice how to avoid pissing them off. So my question was, do you think that the same advice would apply to a company that builds on open source software that is used by normal people as opposed to companies?
Open source. So I guess, I mean, in any case, when you have a community, and a community is a funny beast, right? Because there's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of emotions. I remember when I first came to Lucidworks, again, I had not been in and around open source technology, and I was like, wow, like, people take some of this stuff really personally. I mean, there were like some really kind of nasty things that were going on the list and that kind of thing. I think it's always, do your best to be a good citizen, right? Do your best to be respectful. And as an organization, and like I said, I think Bloomberg is a good example, right? They are like so far ahead in terms of a lot of the R&D and the things that they're doing, but they showcase that back publicly. And they're very open about their use, and they've been contributing things back in. And I think there are companies that can do this really well. The stigma, I think, is targeted more at the company who claims to be the steward of the project. Because now you're sort of exposed as whether you're doing right or wrong, right? Companies who have other sort of focuses that are interacting with the community, it's typically always seen as like, oh, that's really generous of them to come in and spend their time, sponsor a conference, contribute code or blogs and those kinds of things back. But as you sort of stand up and say, hey, I'm going to be the commercial entity behind this thing, you have a lot more exposure and a lot more expectations. And I think listening is the first thing that you have to do. And I try to keep in touch with folks, even outside of the company, in terms of, okay, how are we doing? What are the perceptions that are going on? What do you think of the work we're doing in Fusion and those kinds of things? And then our own team. Like I said, it's very special in that our open source team, some of them who are actually here today, are, they're almost representatives of the community first, employees of Lucidworks second. and they're very vocal, and they don't hesitate to tell us when, hey, you know what, I don't think we should do it that way, or things like logo changes or website updates and things that we just wanted to do to create better experiences for the end users. We wanted to make sure that we were doing this without creating too much friction. But I think like all things sort of social, that you just kind of want to have a level of awareness, and you want to listen to the people around you. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily always right or you're necessarily always right, but there's just an element of respect that needs to come into this. And I hope that the impression is, as an organization, that we've done a good job at that. It doesn't mean that we don't occasionally step on toes or create some friction that we have to then go out and kind of smooth the waters for. So,
well, thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Giving a big round of applause one more time.